We usually try to remain relatively impartial at Radio Juxtapoz, but there are two things that you need to know about today's guest, Caledonia Dance Curry, aka Swoon. One is that she has the coolest real name in art, bar none. Second is that she absolutely dominates the dance floor. Welcome back to Radio Juxtapoz. My name is Doug Gillen, and today you join Evan Preco and myself live from Aberdeen, Scotland for the first in a two-part series in partnership with Nuart Aberdeen. Now in its 7th year, Nuart Aberdeen is the UK's and possibly even Europe's most notorious and well-loved week of street art, murals and off-the-beaten-path discussions and panels. The theme for this year's programme was rewilding, encouraging participants and audiences to reconsider how they see the public space and the role art and culture can play in that. Our guest on today's episode was brought out of a 6-year retirement to create work on the street for the first time in the UK in almost a decade.
I have a lot of people stop and be like, hey, I missed the bus and I had to walk down the street, and now I'm glad I missed the bus because I saw you making this. And I'm like, you know, that feels good. It's like, okay, I could make your day a little better.
Having established herself as a stalwart of the scene by the turn of the millennium, today, New York-based Swoon is a true pioneer of street art culture. Working under the cover of darkness, she was quick to make her mark by applying pre-made block print wheat pastes in underexplored areas of this city. The subjects would range from those with deep personal relationships to complete strangers she grew fascinated with, and would last as long as the elements or this city would allow. Before long, she had burst through the confines of the street, settling comfortably within contemporary museums, or as we speak today, showing with Deitch projects at Art Basel in Switzerland. Through her project Heliotrope Foundation, she has harnessed a beautiful relationship between art and activism, creating meaningful, tangible change in areas that need it the most. Today, she is primarily focused on her stop-motion animation and filmmaking practices, all of which we are going to cover in this conversation today. But most importantly, as a human, there is an energy flowing through Caledonia that is as beautiful as it is infectious, and she is an absolute joy of a person to be around, so it gives me nothing but pleasure to say you are listening to Radio Juxtapoz live in conversation with Swoon.
But I want to start this with a tale, a story. So you were the first cover artist that I worked on an issue Juxtapoz, but I didn't realize at the time Joey Garfield outed your name in that article, and I think it was the first time that you had been called Caledonia Curry in print, and you were like, "Hey, I told Joey not to do that."
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. So Caledonia Dance Curry is the name. It is like one of the greatest names, the greatest birth names of all time. And Swoon's one of the best artist monikers of all time. So, but I want to apologize almost 18 years later that we
Thank you. I pretended that I didn't remember, but I had this really elaborate revenge planned for tomorrow, and now I'm going to call it off.
Oh, really? Oh, wait.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No, I forgot. I totally forgot about that. But thank you. I would love an apology anytime.
I'm really,
send them in, bring them.
Anyone else got anything? I'm really sorry, and I'm sure Joey Garfield in Evanston, Illinois right now, if he's listening.
Oh, we love that guy.
We love Joey. So
Caledonia.
That's right.
This means this is like coming home.
That
so you're like, welcome home.
Yes. Yeah. So Caledonia is a Pictish name. It's like the Picts of the Highlands, or these kind of. It means like steadfast and stubborn, which I only recently discovered. Was kind of excited to learn.
I have this guy here. He's a Pictish warrior.
Pict. Oh my God.
We're looking at a tattoo, folks. So
incredible.
Really
Pictish warrior.
Yes, they're so cool looking. They're like crazy covered in tattoos. And
yeah, they wore blue. They lived in like just the most remote, harshest conditions that you could ever imagine. And they were the only tribe that managed to successfully fight off Julius Caesar when the Romans came in. And they got to these guys who were living in these mountains covered in blue paint with tattoos, all completely naked, running feral across the north of Scotland, and they had conquered the rest of Britain, got to there and went, nah, we're good.
We're good.
They just turned back.
And that's why they're known as like the steadfast, right? So
are you steadfast and stubborn?
I fucking yes I am.
Do you have to be? You have to be a little bit.
I think so. I mean, I think every artist has to be, right? They say it's like, as an artist, you have to be this combination of like this face sensitive, like little soul. And then the other half of you just has to be like, I won't be stopped, you know? Because like otherwise, like.
Because you work with, and we're kind of jumping right in, your productions are often very big productions.
Yes.
And so you're kind of taking on that role. So what are you like when you're on that set, that environment? If I asked one of the crew just now, what would they say?
That's one of the crew. No, I think that I'm quite mellow. It's more, the stubbornness is much more deep rooted. It's more like the project in Braddock where I was like, for 15 years, I won't give up, and we will land this properly, and we will find the way. You know, it's a little bit more of like a kind of a quiet, like, just being like, I know like where I'm steering, and I'm going to go there, and I'm going to get there.
It's more like career stubbornness where it's like, I'm going to get this thing done.
Yeah. And every once in a while, it will be like a stubbornness, like, you know, working like in a museum and like, you know, somebody's trying to be like, just hang it here. And I'm like, no. There's a spot. There's one spot. That's it. We have to hang it in its spot, you know? So I have those moments too.
I'm trying to think of the most, what are you doing here?
Fuck, I don't know.
You're existing in so many different spaces and places, and you have definitely transcended beyond what we experience as just street art. But for some reason, you've kind of come back.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. It's why did I come back? I just kind of felt like it. I was like, oh, it could be fun. We just have a little sun, go to Scotland, see some old friends. You know, and just sort of have a little moment. But essentially, I kind of did like a hard retirement because street art is so consumptive as a practice. It's obsessive, and there's a whole community. There's so much momentum that happens that I was like, if I don't cut this off, I'm never going to like learn about this other half of my creative self. And so I really did have to like do a hard line. But then I kind of like fudged the line a little this summer. Like,
a little more. So you've retired the street art aspect of your practice?
Yes. Yeah, and I haven't made any more prints or like portraits in that style. I haven't gone out pasting since 2017.
But you did Nuart in Norway back in the day.
Back in the day, exactly.
So this is an interesting, like, the world has changed, but street art, whatever we consider to be street art, has changed dramatically. That was still a little bit more renegade time when you did that, or when you went to the Fame Festival and did stuff. Like, that was such a different time. When you come to something like this, and like, you know, it's the consistency is Martin Reed, obviously, and but do you feel like
a grandma?
So he's been building up
like a relic. Yes.
I wasn't gonna say a relic. I was gonna say more of
like old royalty.
Do you feel
like one of the old Pictish stones?
There you go.
I was gonna say something a little bit more complimentary, more of a pioneer. But
okay, yeah, I tried.
Does it feel weird, just like how big this stuff all is, and like there's like, you know, people with maps
totally
in the street,
different.
Like,
yeah. It just, I mean, and even just the mural scale. Like, I actually believe that there's a pretty big difference between like illegal, like hit and quit it interventions on the street and like ginormous production murals. For me, they're like only tangentially related to each other.
Because they're in the street.
That's right. Yeah.
And what are your feelings on the bigger productions then?
I mean, I just think it's just a different art form in a way. Like, I think, you know, I like them. Like, I'm going around this town in particular being like, oh wow, this town is really benefiting from this. This is like, it's kind of like breathing some deeply necessary oxygen into this place. But it just feels like a different.
And it's a different rush. I mean, when you were first doing this on the streets, it was like hit it and and get your ass out of there.
That's right. I'm like, now is that phrase actually creepy that I just used? Yeah. This is probably got some innuendo I don't know about.
There's definitely another connotation there.
Sorry. Excuse me. I didn't mean that. I'm like, who was I hanging out with back then that was saying that about street-based stuff? Anyway,
now it's like, you know, somebody paints a mural for 3 or 4 days. So it's like, they really aren't related to what you were doing at the beginning.
It's very different. Yeah, it's very different. When I was first like thinking about like making stuff out of the street, because I was such like a fine art kid that it was like a pretty weird thing for me to like want to go out on the street at all. So I actually because I'm like kind of a nerd, it took me like 6 months of like deep study to like make this decision. And one of the things I was basically learning about every form of art that was sort of temporary and public. And so I was like studying like Diego Rivera and the whole Mexican mural movement and the Chicano movement in the 70s in San Francisco, and all these different like kind of, ways that people were sort of making art that was like publicly accessible. So I have always identified like a thread with muralism, but I particularly am really bad at murals. Like I actually think they're quite hard to do, and I'm just like not good at them. So there's that. And then I just like, the thought process at that, it was so much about like mischief and like, temporality and like letting the paper raw off the wall and like letting it like be in these kind of messy, downtrodden sort of spaces.
Is that what drew you to the paste up then?
Yeah, I loved it. That's why I never painted, because the paint didn't decay in the same way. And the paper has this like life cycle that I just find super interesting.
And I think there's such an element of, and you experience it particularly at festivals, there's an element of performance that comes with the mural artists. They are there, they're up, they're kind of higher than you.
You get to watch them painting because it's going on over days and days.
But with paste ups, it's so quick.
Yeah.
Just like stencils, that performance is really, really rare, and you've got to really
try
be in the
not
right
to
place.
be seen.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that's the whole point, right? You're kind of like, I'm doing this, I don't really...
Sort of an anti-performance, really.
Yeah.
Was that intentional, that you didn't want to be the center of it all?
Oh, I hate it. I did the Bowery wall one time. It felt like, I don't know, it literally felt like one of those dreams where you're like, it's the show and the opening has happened, but you didn't finish the art and everyone's trying to talk to you, but you're trying to finish the art. It was sort of like that.
Yeah, right.
It was like, thousands of people were trying to talk to, because I wasn't up in a lift, I was on the ground. And I was just like, this is impossible.
I imagine the first time you put a paste up on the street, there was a thrill.
Yeah.
Because you weren't talking to anybody.
Mm-mm. No, you were just trying to do it. Yeah, you were just like, hey, trying to,
Right. And it's like basically having to explain how you write a song if you do a mural in front of people. Like, well, this is how I write a song. And it's like, that's hard to do.
Yeah.
So it's, I think, a better way of doing it.
Do you still get that thrill from other... Because you do so many different things. I imagine doing it for an institution or something like that is going to be different.
Yeah, like running around on the street and having that like kind of adrenalized fun is totally different, for sure. I definitely don't really quite have that.
And is that what brought you kind of back here? 2017, we're looking, that's like 5-6 years we're talking.
I wouldn't say so, because I don't think it's really going to be the same, because we're part of a festival. Even though I don't know that my spots are permissioned, in fact, I think they're not. But I just think it's still under the auspices of a festival, so I don't think it's going to have that same kind of feeling. I'm really kind of just here. I think it was almost more like a slight sentimentality for like this community. There's something so like, being together, and like Martin and Carlo and you guys, and like just the way everyone, there's something so like supportive and like do it together, like about this movement that I've always loved.
And so would you say that the contemporary art world's not like that?
It kind of not. I mean, I don't really know, because like my connection to the contemporary art world is so sort of in and out. So I've never felt like I'm a total insider in that world, so I can really speak from it. I don't feel that way, but maybe nobody feels that way.
How do you feel then, kind of looking back on street art culture? Do you feel that you're too far removed from it and it's not really still for you, or do you still feel that kind of like really deep, close connection to it?
I think I feel the close connection to like the people that I know, but I also, even just coming here, and a lot of the younger artists are saying like, hey, like one of the painters that I talked to yesterday, she was like, you're basically one of the reasons I started doing this. And like hearing something like that is like pretty amazing. Like it makes you want to cry. You're like, oh my God, right?
I might start crying.
So like that, there's like that connection in that way of being like, holy shit, even if I've been off over here doing this and that, getting distracted by these other projects, that somehow like there's still a thread, and like you kind of re-feel it in those moments.
What is it that you've actually brought here? We should actually talk about the content of the art.
What are you? So what are you doing?
I just
I know you're doing something.
Again, we're just gonna keep asking. What are you doing?
I think I'm just gonna not do anything and pretend and be like, I'm doing it tomorrow. I'm doing it tomorrow.
But you have delayed doing it, right? Yeah.
I'm just being totally lazy. No, I just brought a bag of paste ups, very old school style.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna do a few spots.
Yeah.
That's it.
Any particular characters or anything like that?
I mean, it's just like a bunch of figures that I've, like my dad is going to be a portrait of my dad. I'm sort of thinking about where they're going to go. There's some portraits of friends. I think I have 2 portraits of Monica.
Oh, cool.
She's always a star.
Yeah, right.
And then Sasu, who's also actually Kami Sasu. We're like a street art pair for years. I drew also a drawing of Sasu.
Does it change for you the relationship that you have if you're doing people that you have a close relationship with? If you're doing it with your father, how does that change anything? Compared to doing it with like if you're doing a paste up of a boy that you saw on the street or something like that, and then you catch that.
I have my own like feelings about them, but when I'm actually pasting them out, I think I'm thinking more about the relationship that other people are going to have to them. You know, I'm like, how is this like old man with a staff going to feel? Should he go in this dark passage, in this alley, in this alcove? You know what I mean? Like, what's it going to feel like to come upon this figure?
For you then, would you want the audience in Aberdeen to know that this is her father, this is her friend? Or do you like to just leave it more, this is totally open and up for interpretation?
I think it's up to how much people. A lot of times people really do like to know that. And it is sometimes nice, you know, when people feel that you have a personal connection to it, they can also then relate it back to themselves a little more. So I don't mind that either way. I've always made work where you don't need anything. You
don't need the notebook and
you can just approach it. But if there's more, then it's good.
You use reoccurring imagery, but when the first thing that you put up on the streets back in the day, what was that image? And do you use any of that imagery today?
The very first thing I put up was almost like this kind of, I don't know what, it was like these two guys with like weird like wires coming out of their heads. I think it was a little like, it was like slightly almost like sci-fi or something.
That's different.
Yeah.
Definitely different to the artists that we know today.
You can see the perplexed look on my face right now.
Yeah. Wires, you say here.
Yeah, exactly. And they were not very, the faces were very simple. You couldn't really like kind of emotionally connect to them. I mean, it was really young work. I was in college. So it was, you know, it was me just kind of very finding my voice. And it's almost like, you know, the things that were like leading me at the time were like, where I had never seen a city. I mean, I grew up like in a small town. Like I get to New York and there's like fire escapes and like ductwork and wires and all this shit everywhere. And I was just like, what is this? You know, and then sort of feeling like I'm a human and how do I connect with this? And so I think I was kind of drawing this like sort of human city hybrid, sort of finding like, how do I relate to this like place? Back then I was like sort of anti-vulnerable. I really was just like kind of out in the world, like, okay, I'm just going to do whatever, but like, I'm really not going to quite show myself. And so I think that work like really reflected that. And yeah, I brought that work back out when I did like a full on retrospective in Cincinnati that one time, but that's it.
What were you going to art school for at the time? What did you think you thought you were going to be?
I didn't know. I knew that I would figure something else out because like I studied classical painting. So I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be a classical painter, but I was like, something's going to happen when I'm in school and I'm going to like crack this thing open and figure out who I am. And that's what happened.
And what took you out to the street then? Especially if you're doing classical painting, it's not like a nurturing environment where they're showing you to go out and paint in the street. And muralism wasn't a thing then.
No.
So what was it that was pulling you that direction?
It was like I just had a nervous breakdown. I just was like, this can't be it. Like this can't be the whole of the story. And I just was so into like what I was seeing outside. Like it was like this thing where like, so like you look at like all these kind of collage artists, like Rauschenberg, for example, I adored, you know, and I still adore Rauschenberg. But when I saw the streets, I was like, oh, that's probably these people were probably actually referencing this like actual thing that's just happening outside because of the bills and the graffiti on the wall and that, you know, and I was like, oh, fuck. Like, I don't even feel like making an imitation of this. I just want to like go be in it. It was just like wanting to go to the better party. I was like, that's the cool party. I'm going to get in that one rather than like staying in my studio and like imitating a collage. I was just like, I'm just going to get in it.
But was there like a community of people doing stuff on the streets at the time that you knew? Or is it, you were just like, it was just a solo mission? It was
pretty much a solo mission. I had some friends that like maybe had like written graffiti when they were like 14 or something, you know? So like, and like a bunch of my friends were New Yorkers. So like, there was this sense of like, oh, this is a thing that people do. But I didn't know anyone who was like active, and I didn't I didn't have any. So it was like a pretty weird decision for me. It's just it took me a while. It took me like 6-8 months to really kind of be like, okay, what's this going to look like for me?
And when were you swooned?
So when I moved to New York, I got to be friends with all these New York kids. One of them became my partner, my boyfriend at the time. And he had a dream that I was a graffiti writer who wrote Swoon. And I remember when he said...
Projecting a little bit there.
Yeah. He was like, you're a graffiti writer and you wrote Swoon. He was like, and it was such a beautiful name. And I was like, that's ridiculous. I would never do that. I am a classical painter. And then I was also like, oh, but that's a beautiful name. And I just remembered it. So then years later, when I was doing this, I was like thinking like I wanted a name. I was just talking about this yesterday because John mentioned Bast. And I was like, you know, Bast was like one of my favorite artists ever and is the reason I took a name because at first I was like, oh, names are just ego, blah, 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 you know? And then I would walk around the streets and I would see somebody who did this like news box, and I'd be like, that person's so cool. What is that? And I'd be like, Bast. And then I'd see something totally different and I'd be like, oh, it's amazing. Who did that? Oh, Bast again. And it was this moment of realization that a name can be almost like a generous way of being like, hey, you knew me. And so I decided to take a name, but I was like, you can't make up your own name. I just felt like, I was like, in my head, that was the rules. That was the rules. Like your name has to find you.
Yeah.
And so I like remembered that dream and I was like, okay, I'm going to go with that.
That landed for a long time.
It really stuck.
Do you feel then, because what tends to happen a lot, is particularly when artists come from graffiti, is they'll do graffiti, they'll have their name, and then they'll start wanting to exhibit in galleries, and then slowly but surely that name is now their full name. The moniker's gone. Do you, as a sort of as an artist that floats so often in institutional spaces, do you feel pressure to drop the Swoon?
No, it's the opposite. I want to go to my name, but people struggle with it. And nobody wants me to ever. It's just so much easier. Even like my own signature, like it's when I sign something, that's just what I sign. Like I was like, oh.
Would you sign Swoon or?
I always do.
Yeah. If like on your bank card or something like that?
No, not on my bank card. But I sign like but it could be just as well. My only legible signature is my art, So it's weird. Like I want to switch, but even I'm struggling and nobody else everyone just, it's a little hard to ditch, to be honest.
In the last few years, we've collectively lived through seismic changes in the way that we see the world. The rise of Black Lives Matter brought strained racial tensions to the forefront of the global conversation. The COVID-19 pandemic shut the whole world down, and it seems on an almost daily basis, our collective way of thinking is changing faster than most realise. Art plays a role in how we process and digest these experiences, but on a more tangible level, it can be the vehicle that drives positive change forward. The Heliotrope Foundation is an initiative spearheaded by Swoon and has been working with communities impacted by natural disasters or in urgent need of social care formally since 2015.
Each of them use community building through the construction of spaces, either through the construction of functional spaces or spaces of wonder. For me, I've always thought that even in times of crisis, that if we can bring creativity and art and joy and wonder into the process of rebuilding, that it sort of connects with something about us as human beings.
The Braddock projects referenced in this next section have been gradually building since 2007, when Swoon and a group of friends purchased an abandoned church in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Through a series of creative approaches, the building was restored where possible and then deconstructed and rebuilt where damage was beyond repair. Alongside this, Heliotrope collaborated with Sakaya House to create the Sanctuary, a community centre and transitional living space whose mission is to reduce drug addiction, recidivism and homelessness by meeting people in their vulnerable states. We talk furthermore about this and much, much more right here, right now on Radio Juxtapoz.
I remember the first time that I saw your work in person in a gallery setting. You always brought like a vibe. And what I mean is it felt like there was always like, you had like a posse and there was like a community of people that you kind of brought, that you guys kind of all brought along with each other. When did that start becoming something that was like, you kind of had like a crew? I'm talking about like when you did the boat down the Mississippi and that kind of stuff. Like when did the vibe?
That was a full collective.
I mean, that was such an incredible.
I think it started. I think I kind of know a start, and it's. I lived on Myrtle Avenue, and me and Kyler, we were just talking about ad busters and all this kind of stuff, right? Reclaim the streets, the commons. I was totally obsessed with all that stuff, and there were all these street level billboards. They just boom, like overnight they popped up all down the street that I lived on. It really just kind of ruined the street like all at once. And I was like kind of in thinking about that sort of question of like, why can they shout at us, but we can't shout back? And so I just went through the painting studios. I bought like huge rolls of paper. I got tons of buckets and I just went through all the painting studios. And I was like, guys, 9 a.m. Sunday morning, May 15th or whatever. Here's your paper, make your painting, meet me at this time, and we're going to cover all the billboards on the street. And I got so into it, just like organizing and just being like, guys, we're doing this and trying to figure out how to not get in trouble and doing all the kind of research and stuff. And it ended up being like so stressful that I was like, oh man, I'm never doing this again. But then we all got together, we did it. And then like the next day, I just like looked at the street and I was like, yo, we just did that. And then that was truly like an us, it was a thing that if one person had done it, it would have been like, that's cool, but like, wow, big ego for you to cover this whole, every billboard, you know what I mean? But to just be like, oh, we all did this together, it was like, oh, this is something. So I think at that moment, I just was like, oh, this is a completely different experience if you do it together.
Do you still operate with the same crew?
Well, you know what? We sort of formed into a collective called Toy Shop. But that, and actually, weirdly, the project that I'm working on in Braddock, where we just are turning the house over to become housing for women coming out of prison, that's a direct result of Toy Shop. And like the people that, like that collective essentially moved to Braddock. And then those people connected me with Zakiah House, who's like my partner for like creating this housing. So like, it is kind of bizarre to be like, wow, these like snarky like women in their 20s like wearing tutus and vandalizing things are the same essentially group of people that are like, okay, now we like took over and revamped this building and we're like creating housing for people like coming out of homelessness. Like there's a through line.
This is such a huge part of your identity now, this philanthropy. Thank you. Easy enough to get out. Philanthropy. Outreach, we'll call it. What do you think the role is that art plays in wider social issues?
I think the role is sort of how we define it. It's what we decide that it is, or maybe experiment and see what it can be. But for me, best intentions. But for me, I think it's like, I just always almost like metaphysically like recognize art as this like insanely generative force. Like I just always feel like it's like, you know, that like tip of the welding rod where it's just like, and like it's just making things kind of happen. There's like a heat and an energy there that can cause like, you know, two metals to fuse and cause all these other kind of reactions. And so I'm always like, okay, that's the creative spark. Let's just move it around. Let's just see what it can do in these other places. And like, is it like, can that same kind of creative like belief in magic be used to transform a situation that seems hopeless? If so, let's try that.
I mean, thank God you didn't become a studio painter.
Yeah. Although when I do sit down and do a bit of studio painting, I love it. It's so fun.
But it's like a personal kind of magic. But like, it's just like the way you just articulated that. It's like, oh, I'm so glad that you didn't just decide like on.
It's true. It's not my true self. Yeah, it's not my true self. And I always knew that. I was like, there's something else in here that I need to figure out.
What are some, you know, you've done so many projects. What was a project you really, really wanted to come to fruition that just didn't happen, that you still like, it's like, I'm going to get this done at some point in my life? Like, is there things that you're kind of like, I went about this the wrong way and I think I can come back to it and do something?
Well, you know, I think it's what I'm doing right now. So like when I was 20, I saw a William Kentridge movie, got my mind blown and decided that I was an animator. But I also was like a 20-year-old kid with probably undiagnosed ADHD and a shit ton of energy. And I was like, either I could like tweak myself to death on animation, or I could like rage around the streets and be a maniac. And like the choice was obvious, right? I was like, okay, I'm going to put this aside. So then flash forward 20 years later, multiple life crises, all kinds of like familial deaths and like, you know, trauma and therapy and like just like a deep need to be like, I'm going to like sit down for a minute. Kind of, I felt like the universe sort of picked me up by the scruff of my neck and was like, okay, down girl, like chill for a minute. And in that like moment, and so I picked that back up and all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, there's all, like I could never have done it back then. I needed to be who I am now to do it. And then that has led me into this whole trajectory where I'm learning how to direct film.
Do you find art therapeutic? Even as a career, does it still help you release those, you know, feelings or experiences? And
1,000%. I mean, the core of the work, if it's going to remain true, it's always going to be that. You know, the when you said like even as a career, like for me, the career is like third, fourth stage. The creation is first stage, and that's always, you know, the creation. Every single time I've ever made something that's new, I'm like, oh, this is unmonetizable. It's, you know, it's for nothing. It's just for me. And then somehow like a year or two later, there will start to be some way that actually becomes, you know, part of my support system. But that often happens like a couple years later after I've already been like, oh, no, this is just a weird thing I'm doing for myself.
When it comes to like something like animation, you do kind of have to change your brain a little bit because you're not, I mean, it's sellable, but it's not sellable. It's kind of
I didn't think it was when I was making it. And then NFT came along. And then suddenly my friend was like, would you like me to email you some money? And I was like, you know, essentially.
Was that the breadth of the conversation? Would you like me to email you some money? Yes. But so how did it go from doing these, we've seen these things on Instagram a little bit, the animations you're making. I think you presented them at Jeffrey Deitch a couple years ago. But how did it come now you're directing something longer? I know we're jumping around, but like what you can't just mention that without, like, what are you doing?
What's going on?
Again, what are you doing?
That's a very long-term process. So it's not going to be for a while, but I'm basically I ended up writing a fairy tale, which was this kind of weird, I really have like always found like my creative muse to be like this funny little like impish nymph little gremlin that's like in my brain being like, now we're doing this. And I'm always like, what are we doing? This is so weird. And I really felt that way about writing. I was just like, now I'm typing and I don't know why. And it was like, then this whole kind of fairy tale came out and then it just stayed. My friend like told me this story the other day. She was like, oh, that's Haunted Nugget. I was like, what's Haunted Nugget? And she was like, it's when like something comes up and it will not go away. And it's like and it just sits on your shoulder and it's the nugget of like a project and it's there and it will not go away. And she's like, nobody puts nugget in the corner. Like it's never going to go. And you have to, eventually it will come into fruition because it's not going anywhere. And so that was sort of how this fairy tale was. It just like stayed and stayed. And then I slowly started to connect with people. I started working with a producer. We got into this program, the Sundance Writer Directors program. And it's like essentially like a film school of sorts because I hadn't done any kind of film school. So it was like all these like amazing, like Oscar winning screenwriters that would just like sit you down and be like, we love you. This is amazing. And just tear it to shreds. And then be like, but don't give up. It was incredible. It was incredible. And then like working on directing, learning that part. And then, yeah, just I'm kind of still in that process right now.
Can you give us a sort of overview of what this fairy tale story is about? Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's two
give us your brief
girls. Yeah. I actually don't have a brief, weirdly. So it's an autobiographical fairy tale. I'll just tell you the how it came to be.
Sure.
It's an autobiographical fairy tale, and it's based on a time when I was about 7, and my mom had a full-on psychotic breakdown. And it was totally terrifying, and I had like a ton of PTSD around it in adulthood that I didn't even quite realize. And then I started doing all kinds of therapy. Like the day after one of the therapy sessions, I was just like, I couldn't sleep because, it can be quite kind of scary when you're sort of bringing all this stuff up.
Digging in.
Exactly. So, yeah.
We close all that up real tight.
For a reason.
Do not open the box.
Yes.
Do not
so
open
the box is open and I'm like,
I can't stop crying.
Yeah. So I was like, one day there was a wicked witch. And I started retelling the story kind of with like transposed into a fairy tale. And I found that it like deeply settled my heart in a way. And I was like, oh, like my inner psyche speaks fairy tale. That's like the language she wants to speak in. And so it's about these two little girls that are kind of growing up with a witch. And one of the little girls is like discovering her intuition at the same time as this kind of caretaker is having a psychotic breakdown. And she's trying to understand where the line is. Like, can she step into her own kind of intuition and creativity without becoming mad like this person? And also, how is she going to survive this?
Had you written before?
I mean, not really. I did have like a moment in high school where I was like, oh, weird. Am I going to be a writer? And then I remember at the time, it was like I had craft, but I didn't have anything to say.
Right.
I think because I was young and I was too repressed or whatever, like all that, I was like shoving down my true self because it was, scary or whatever. Had a lot of trauma to deal with. And then like, I think once I started to unpack all that stuff and I didn't have to like sort of hide so much self from myself, then I became able to actually write with story.
And did writing feel like an extension of what your practice was already?
It did. And also I just feel like I'm a communicator. Like I think I'm a professional communicator.
If you're building an installation, there's a story behind it, right?
Yeah.
You're creating something there. So it's maybe not just as formalized as writing a full, fairy tale, but there's that process there.
But the narratives start to emerge even in and of themselves. Like I would sort of piece together the figures in different ways. Like, oh, this sort of feels like this narrative is emerging. And, people would go through it and find their own and tell me about it. So it was always like a little stickiness, a little kind of narrative, kind of propulsion within those works.
And you had always done recurring characters.
Mm-hmm.
And you would place them in different contexts or different medium, different styles of art or of way you would do things. So it's like we kind of were going on a journey with you already.
Right. And so when people see little bits of what I'm working on, they tend to be like, oh, this is just like an absolute extension of that. It's like they've just started moving. Now they've started talking, but it's really not that different.
If you're making an installation for a space, then how does that process work for you? Do you already have an idea of what it is you're trying to? You come into a museum and go, right, I've got this thing, this will fit here. That works. Or do you see a space and then start to respond to it? How does that process work for you?
So far I have tended to see a space. Yeah, I kind of, it's like, I think in the same way that like, you know, you do a paste up out on the street, you're always looking at like, you know, what's this alcove feel like? Who's walking by here? How does it kind of become an outgrowth of the architecture? And then once I was then asked to work inside architecture, I was still responding to the architecture. I always thought that if I went back to school, it would be for architecture. It's like really throwing me that I'm doing film, but because I was always quite obsessed with architecture in that way. And so yeah, it was always a little bit of like a conversation with the space.
Does it feel different than working on the outside to the inside for you?
Oh, it's totally different, but it just allows a different part of my brain to open up. Because the outside, you have one set of considerations. They're pretty strict. You know, it's like flat on a wall, has to get rained on, like, you know, but on the inside, there's just formally you can do all these different things. You know, and the other thing is I do think on the inside, this is weird to say, but I do restrict myself a tiny bit with content out on the street because I just think it's everybody's seeing it. So like, for example, I did a piece in a museum where I went deep into like familial trauma, and I was like, there was recordings and these really quite scary images. And I was like, because if you came into this space, you came into this space, right?
It's you've made the choice. You've stepped
right.
through the door, you've made the choice, and you have allowed yourself to access these really deep personal experiences.
Whereas if somebody's out on the street, I prefer to be like a source of joy and comfort, to be honest. Many people who are like living homeless have said to me like, this piece feels like my friend. And so I'm kind of thinking about that when I'm outside in a way that I'm not thinking about it when I'm inside. You know, and it is interesting to think about, you know, in some ways I always felt that limitation of an indoor space. But there is another way in which I do give myself a certain permission once I'm in that protected space.
How do you think institutions like that impact creativity? Do you think it's, do you think there's a harmonious relationship? Do you think they nurture creativity and encourage it, or is it something else?
I mean, to be honest, I've always felt nurtured and encouraged. You know, I think for me, it's almost like, it's always like a yes and. Like, I haven't found that there's too many spaces that I like absolutely hate or won't go into. It's just that if you were to say your entire career will only ever be this, I would be like, no. And that's, I think, why I reacted so hard when I was in art school, because at that time there were few models that I had seen of like letting your work live in different ways. And so I kind of was getting funneled into this idea that like, if it's a square on a wall, it's a square on a wall, and that's all it ever is. Now I'm like, oh, I love squares on walls. They're great. Like, absolutely. And they contain part of the story of all this other work that I'm doing. And I love them as like this one facet of this larger puzzle. So it's not like, I never feel like that any one of these things is like particularly bad. It's just that it can never be the whole story.
When an institution comes to Swoon Studio and says, we want to have you do something, do they come with a set of expectations that you're kind of like, hey, look, I don't necessarily want to do what you think I want to do? Like it
has happened, or I mean, it depends. So right now I'm actually even also taking a break from huge installations that are in this way. But back in the day, I would do these like really intensive, immersive installations, and I used to actually sit down with the director of the museum, and I would be like, just so you know, you don't want to work with me. And I would be like, I'm going to destroy your floors. I'm going to destroy your walls. I'm going to have like 50 dirty punks in here, and they're going to scare the crap out of everyone. And we're going to break the lift, and we're going to drive it into the wall, and you're going to hate my guts. And I was like, I'm going to tell you this now because I don't want you to get disappointed later. Like, you need to hear this, and you need to still say yes. And then if you still say yes, like, we're good, you know?
That's kind of what I wanted you to say.
Yeah, that was great.
I remember when you had already done some really incredible projects, like, you know, the Venice Biennale, all that. I mean, you were already a star, but when Art in the Streets happened at
I don't know why that made me laugh.
I wish you could see her face there.
I can say that to my friend.
That was good. That was a sweet moment. I'm not going to lie.
When Art in the Streets happened at MoCA, I remember I felt like your installation was a little bit like, okay, boys, I don't fuck around. And I thought it was such a stellar installation piece in a room full of men, kind of kicked a lot of ass. In this context of this world, which is very heavily male, do you sometimes feel like when you put something up like that, you're like, yeah, see guys, all right, boys, move aside a little bit? Or are you not like, do you not get like that?
I get like that.
Okay, yeah.
Let's go, girl.
Okay, so like, I just want to get this out of the way. I have felt very, very supported by the boys and men and male people of the street art world, whatever we want to call themselves. Like
The boys.
I really know, like 100%, like so much support, so much care. Like people always think that I'm going to come with these stories. I'm like, no, I felt depressed. Like I really feel like that people have been like, Buck, yeah, come in here, let's do this. And like, just in so many ways, including in that installation where Revoke, I didn't even know who he was. And we were having a complete crisis. Like this shit was about to fall down and somebody came in and held a pole for like 20 minutes. And if I was like almost like shaking, like nerve-wracked, freaked out. And at the end I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. What's your name? And he was like, I'm Revoke. And I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like that's who just helped me like rescue my installation. So like full on support, you know what I mean? And so it's not about any specific like humans, but I think in society as a whole, when you grow up as a woman in the era that I grew up in, there's 100% this feeling that you're going to have to lap everyone 3 or 4 times like to be heard, that you're just going to have to do that. You're just going to have to be like, it's going to be as big and as persistent and as like putting everything into it, like kind of just to show up on the radar.
It's ironic that Revoke would be the one helping you because now he thinks so architecturally focused in his work.
Yeah.
That seems like kind of like, what an interesting kind
He
of...
saw the crisis and he was like, I got you.
Yeah, amazing.
Relatively recently, you had started doing you were exploring the pregnancy and the woman giving birth, that imagery. And I really, really enjoyed seeing that and the unflinching way that you were approaching it. What triggered that and what was the response to the back of that?
So what triggered it was I'm 45 now. So at that point I was like late 30s and I was like, what am I doing? Do I want to have a child? And I was like, I just felt like I was making the decision to not have kids, but I wanted to make a clear-eyed decision. And for me in life, if I'm going to look at something, if I'm going to think about something, I'm going to do it through art. And so I was like, I'm going to be drawing these, images of women. And so I just started first with a friend of mine who I reconnected with actually while my mom was passing away. So I think it was also, thinking about just motherhood and all that kind of stuff. And so I started on this series of images and I just loved them. I just found them so beautiful. And then I also did feel a little kind of sense of challenge of being like, oh, there aren't images of women giving birth, that you can go through these museums and you can see all the decapitations you like. You can see every form of gore, every form of a human experience, but you're not witnessing birth. I'm like, what is going on there, And so I was like, okay, I'm going to make one of these drawings. And of course, Judy Chicago does have that birth project, but that's another one where it's like, I don't know, I never saw that in a museum. Like it's, those projects would tend to get buried. And I found that like, the only kind of interesting thing that I noticed is that people love those images, like they love them, but they will not, like in terms of like commercially supporting them, crickets. It's like wild. That image in particular, people were kind of quite scared of it. Like it was like kind of feeling generally supportive. But and actually Jeffrey Deitch said this interesting thing to me where he was like, we were talking about it and he was just saying, oh, you're not going to sell that piece. And I was like, what do you mean? People love this piece. And he was like, I have a Picasso painting that won't sell and it's just of a pregnant woman and it's a Picasso. And I was like, he's not right. Like he's got to know like things have changed. No, he's always right. Not always, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He knew. And I was like, whoa, I can't believe he called that.
We haven't even really asked, like, what is the actual process for you to make a piece of art? Like, what does it start with? Like, what's the genesis of like your imagery?
We are fucking jumping around here today.
Yeah, we really are. Is that fine? Is that fine?
It's chaos. It's chaos.
She talked about her early sketches, and it made me go like, "Oh, we haven't even really talked to."
There's no correct path on a podcast.
No, there's not.
We've learned that.
That would be boring if all of a sudden we're just.
Where were you born?
Where were you born? And when will you die? I mean, it's a viewer.
We should go to a psychic while we're here. We'll find out where we're gonna die. Ish.
That would be fun though.
Yeah, just for fun, right? Just
we could just take in a little audio recorder. Everyone would be like, this took a different turn. This is not the content I thought I was getting, but I'm here for it. Sorry, Evan. You can ask your question now.
I was going to say...
Where did this start?
I was going to say, because you mentioned drawings, and I just want to know what the stages of making a piece of artwork is for you. What does it start with?
Yeah, well, so let me see. It starts with usually just seeing a person and being like, oh, I need to draw that person. And then I don't do a ton of life drawing because I'm very slow. Actually, I'm pretty bad at life drawing. And I find that if I take videos, then I can try to capture like just a very like gentle but candid moment.
But video rather than a photo.
Yeah. The artist Matt Small taught me that. I don't know if you guys know him. He's amazing. This guy in England.
UK.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
He was like, take a video. And that is, I found it to be absolutely... And it's weird because it takes 1,000 times longer to see the to find your image. But I have this like weird tweaky, like I love the human face with like an obsessional capacity, so that I can just spend hours like watching the like tiny facial expressions, and just I find it like I'm like, oh, that's so, like, it's just fucking cool to watch a smile appear and disappear, and like watch doubt come, you know what I mean? So like I just love, and then you just like kind of find a few moments within that and then just draw them, and then you kind of see, like, you'll have a bunch of sources to draw from and you'll draw them, and there's this funny thing that happens where it's not always what you think is going to work on a drawing. Like a drawing kind of has its own life. So like it's like, oh, that showed up well in drawing. So okay, that works as a drawing. So let's kind of follow that track. And then I just kind of like dig into it. And carving a portrait in linoleum block is actually like insanely hard to do. It's crazy hard because it's just so unforgiving. You only get two tones. You're using a knife, and then it like prints backwards, so it looks totally different. And there's all these reasons why it's like very, very challenging. And so it's one of those things where it just takes me like days and days and days of just like honing in on it, just trying to make it, get it to appear.
I mean, obviously it was a great question because the answer was great. So
it was a great question. It was just the placement of it. I was like, oh, okay, we're going there. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I hit a nerve in that one. Sorry. I'm gonna equally fucking derail it.
There we go.
Just since we're doing this, we mentioned his name a couple of times. Jeffrey Deitch. Remember the first time you met him and what that experience was like? Because I was watching Fearless earlier, and there's a real quick, it's a throwaway line, and he describes the first time meeting you, and he says something like, and she produced a banana.
I end up visiting Swoon in her modest apartment in Brooklyn. I remember she had these distancing mechanisms. I came in to talk with her, and she somehow produced a banana. It was an awkward circumstance for her of a gallerist coming in. And
there was a banana thrown in, and then we never hear about the banana and what it means, and I've been sitting since watching this going, what the fuck happened with this banana?
It's funny, I don't even remember the banana, but I think for him, it was a signal that I was super awkward, that I was like, welcome to my complete disastrously weird space. Do you want a banana? It was just like, he was like, oh, she's
uncomfortable.
She's very uncomfortable. Which I was. I mean, I was like basically having a panic attack, I think, because like I really had this like quite developed sense of myself as an artist out on the street, but the one person in the sort of art world that I really, really respected and was into was Jeffrey Deitch. I mean, he was doing these shows like Street Market, and
right. Yeah.
He was like the one that I was like, oh, but if Jeffrey called, like that would be different. And then one day my friend calls and she's like, Jeffrey Deitch is looking for you, and I was like, wait, what? And so it was so like, oh, everything could change if I do this.
This was your first experience with a gallery?
Not really, but it was. I had done little tiny things. I had already done a show at a museum in Berlin. Like I had done things, but it was all very, I don't know, like sort of simpatico with the culture that I was part of. This sort of felt like this thing where it was like the outside world is calling,
And what did you have like a vision of what you wanted to get out of that meeting at the time? I mean, this is more of like as a young artist, some kind of a big person from the art world comes. Were you kind of like, well, I'm prepared to tell him my dreams? Like, or was it something where you're like, I don't know?
I didn't know what was, Dwayne, of course you try not to think too much.
Right.
It was shocking. It was one of those things where you're like, literally like when like you write the daydream of what would happen, like that's what happened. So basically he comes in and he's like, oh, this is great. Like, great. He's very casual. And then he says, yeah, come by the gallery next week. I want you to have a show. And I was like, what? And then I came by the gallery and he's like, what? And he's like, tell me what you want to do. So I come by and I like describe this whole thing. And he says, oh, well, you don't have space to do that. Do you want a studio? And I was like, and he like gave me this studio for like 3 months to make this vision in. And
that's fucking cool, being able to just be the guy that goes about just, you need a studio. Here, have a studio, just, I will make your dreams come true.
No, it was incredible. It was incredible. It was transformative.
I feel like you might be the part of, since we were talking about generations earlier, who knows what generation we are, but you're part of like the last generation, I think, of artists who went to art school and didn't necessarily expect that Jeffrey Deitch was going to come to their studio. Because it feels like nowadays there's a generation of younger artists who like that wouldn't even faze them. They expect it because there's so much movement in the art world that's going more and more young because every gallery, everyone's trying to look for the young artist. Like you're kind of part of that last generation where it was a little bit like, this is happening?
Yeah.
Does it kind of surprise you like how confident these younger artists are right now?
I mean, yes. I think, one thing that sort of surprises me, I don't know why this seems funny to me, but I like it. But you see all these painters, and I did a bunch of painting when I was like during the lockdown. But I remember that I watched them, and they're essentially painting the kinds of paintings that I would have made if I kept painting them. It's kind of sweet.
You're like low-key firing shots at them here.
I know. No, I'm not, because I will like their painting. It's kind of nice that somebody you're like, it's like watching somebody who doesn't have to like overdo it or something. You're like, oh, you're just like doing that. But it maybe I did feel a sense of like, wow, I never would have let myself do that. I thought we had to do this like 50 tier like mental episode of like whatever. But so I feel that yeah, that sense of confidence of like they just like allow themselves to make. But I don't know if that's true of all artists, but I guess I see that like of certain artists being like, okay, like there's something sort of nice about it.
That kind of connects back to what we were saying earlier about you being kind of a pioneer in the scene. Like, do you feel proud of being on that pantheon of kind of pioneers? Like when somebody comes up to you at this and kind of says, you're one of the reasons why I did. It's like, does it sense of pride, right?
Oh yeah, huge.
Yeah.
It's like very quite emotional, honestly. Yeah. You're like, oh my God. Yeah, because it's like connects directly to yourself at that age. And like knowing that like we do that. We do build bridges for each other. And like how much it meant for me, the people who built those bridges for me and being like, oh my God, it's me now. Like, that's crazy.
What are you most proud of if you look back?
Oh gosh, I don't know. The thing I keep saying right now, the thing I'm really proud of is Braddock, the project in Braddock.
Okay.
Because it was so hard, because every road pointed to giving up for like so many years. It was like grueling, and it was sort of honestly like almost like humiliating to be like, here's this thing and like, please help. And like, the sort of whole arc of it and like learning the hard lessons in public and like, but the fact that I stayed with it and the fact that like my own journey of like spiritual and personal growth is the thing that led me to finding like what the true answer was. I'm like, fuck yeah. Fuck yeah.
When was the last time you were firmly out of your comfort zone then?
Not right now. I'm visiting my comfort zone. No, I'm meaning like, well, working on this film is so out of comfort zone.
And is that what kind of maybe pushes you into that? Because like if you've done the streets, you've done the museum, it's like, cool, tick, 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 tick. I completed it, right?
My particular artistic temperament needs to be solving new kinds of problems. Like I remember the day that I like quit working on the rafts, and it was like we had thrown the drill into the water again. And I was like, oh, again. I was like, you know what? I would love a different problem right now. I just want like a different kind of problem.
Yeah, and that's amazing.
It just feels like that where like my brain is just like, I feel like it's like why they say the arts and sciences, that there's like a part of like the creative brain that's like, I must be solving a problem. I must be solving a new kind of problem.
What do you get joy at right now that's not part of your kind of art practice? Like what are the things that you're doing? Because you're talking about spiritual growth, and what are you doing that's outside of making, that's kind of all right, I'm not Swoon right now, I'm Caledonia, and I'm kind of hanging out. Like what do you
gosh, I started surfing a few years ago.
There we go.
Which is like amazing. I love it. And what's great about it is I'm super terrible at it, and the freedom of being terrible at something you will never be good at is a true freedom.
I'm not going to be shredding waves anytime soon. I don't know if they say shredding waves. Is that a thing?
As the one person from California here, no?
Please weigh in. No, but you can say it for fun. You can say it for fun.
It's just in case any Californians are listening going, what the... That's not the terminology.
So when you're shredding waves...
I needed to do an accent.
Yeah, exactly.
I missed it.
Like that. And just kind of like, trying... I think I'm having like a little bit of like a second... I'm 45, right? So midlife crisis.
I bet that you had to ask us. I'm 45, right?
Yeah, right? Am I? What was we talking about? So like a little midlife crisis, which is like manifesting and just like doing like fun, like making youthful mistakes and just doing fun, dumb shit and just like silly things I did in my childhood.
But then that brings you back to like why you're here at a street art festival, like years out of retirement. Like you're getting the band back together, sort of. Like it's reforming for a show. There's a freedom to doing that, which is earned.
When I was watching Fearless, and I was watching particularly the rafts and the journeys and the way that you were, I felt like there was a real sort of sense of a Americana coming through with your experience and your journey. How has that changed your relationship with it?
Yeah. I mean, I sort of feel like it's been happening for so long that those cities have all changed as well, But like, I think like coming back here and kind of going around and I felt like reconnected to this sense of wanting to put things in those like a little bit like hidden, unlikely places so that people could discover them kind of on like their worst day or like walking home from work or like, just in that spot of like, I don't know, when you say like Americana and I was thinking about how there's something about like just who we are. I feel like Americans are very like, it's like who we are just like on our regular day. Like they say with Americans, like they was talking about like England has this crazy class system, but like Americans have this very like there's just, I don't know.
I know exactly what you're saying.
It's okay. I'm a completely tangential, but there's this like crazy story from a Malcolm Gladwell book about Korean Airlines. Do you guys know this story? Where Korean Airlines was like crashing constantly at one point.
Yeah, I do know this one.
And they switched and they made them speak English, American English, because they were like in Korean Airlines, there's a hierarchy of power within the language. And it was causing people to not challenge their captains, and it was causing people to crash. But when they changed it, and they were like, who has the lowest like power index in the world? And it was like Americans. Like there's this sense of like all of our ordinariness all together, and that kind of caused them to be able to like then challenge their superiors, which I just thought was sort of fascinating. And when you said Americana, I was just like thinking about like, so my film, it's kind of about growing up at the end of a dirt road in this place where like everybody was like halfway in crisis and everybody was like having mental breakdowns and like crazy addictions, just fucking like driving themselves mad. That you could be that kid, you can be like that 7-year-old and be like, but one day I'm going to be making art and putting it in like the, museums of the world. Like one day I'm going to like, it's totally a likely trajectory that I'm going to come out of that. And I feel that feels like Americana to me in some way.
Yeah. I mean, when you're doing like the boat going down the Mississippi, it's like there's a Mark Twain.
Yes, everybody would be like, I wish I had done that. I always wanted to do that
without the racism thing, but then you bring it to Venice, and it has a whole different look and feel. Feels almost like post-apocalyptically kind of beautiful. Do you think your work feels inherently American?
I feel that you are just having looked through that. I feel like you could only come from America.
Okay. Yeah, he's the one to know.
Yeah, exactly.
As an outsider looking, I couldn't just look at a paste up in the street and go, well, that's an American artist. I couldn't do that. But if I look at the body of work and the variety of it, it's particularly when I see things like rafts going down the Mississippi or riding freight trains and stuff like that. Like this is like all that stuff. When I was watching this, it was just all ticking over. Like this could only be done. This is an American artist. This is like such a deeply American story that I'm watching here.
And do they play it up like when you do a show like in Europe? Do they play it up like this is very American folk or something? Do they play that up, or do you?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a weird place to end it. Dream project.
Honestly, my dream project is where I'm at right now. I really want to like I'm working on this specific film, but I've written like 2 others already, just kind of in my mind. It's like very weird things started to happen where actually both times it was during. So I do like a 10-day silent meditation every year. And both times, like on like the 9th day, it was like some lid just like popped off and this like whole entire film just came out. And I was like sort of being like, okay, I know I'm supposed to be meditating and not writing, but I'm just gonna like write this down. I think like my dream right now is to learn how to catch up with that and make those movies and like just do it.
Will you try? I know that you've got to make the movie before you start thinking about how you're exhibiting it or showing it. Is that something that is already ticking away there?
Well, what I'm finding is weirdly is that like because I'm me and not just like a movie, like not like a born movie director. I have all these years of visual art. I'm finding that as I develop the movie, like we introduced the characters to New York City in this event on a carousel where like Little Amal came in. She's like this giant puppet. And that was like this sort of
amazing.
The performative. Yeah, she was amazing. There was like this performative introduction to the characters. And then like I started doing these kind of storytelling nights where I would kind of tell part of the story and show images. So I'm finding that like the process of the movie being born is not like linear. It's starting to express itself in these different ways. And so I think that that's going to keep happening.
I like that. I can't just picture you just being like, okay, cool, I made this movie and it's on Netflix and you can see it there. So there has to be a Swoon element in there. As a geek, I'm happy to hear that there is.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you, guys.
If you happen to live in the north of Scotland, you can head over to the Nuart Aberdeen page to find the locations of her paste ups, which are scattered across the city. Who knows how long each of them will last, but they are well worth the hunt. Thanks once again to Caledonia for her time and her energy, and thank you to the whole team at Nuart Aberdeen for hosting us for the week. We'll be back with our second part in this series shortly as we finally sit down with Nuart founder Martin Reed. You do not want to miss this one. Till then, look after yourselves and each other.